So let's talk about the meaning of shadow. And I've made some beautiful slides, and I'm going to try and stay on a deepening track of how and why we would explore that which is uncomfortable, that which is painful, that which probably holds power over us and holds captive some of our energy and our potential, because it takes energy to not look at something, to not go there. So this is a phase of everyone's life at some point, probably because of a crisis or coming into such a point of no choice but to go there and look at it. And our society doesn't really have really good, valuable through methods of going through the shadow. So everyone's done bits and pieces of it, or you go and get psychotherapy, or even worse, you just get medicated without any sort of guidance through the actual psychological problems or physiological problems that are connected to trauma. So I'm going to try and include both the physiological, the emotional body, and also this sense of trauma or dissociation from the body. I've traveled around and I've studied both the Western model, the Eastern model, and kind of a little bit of the tribal shamanic model of what the shadow is and where disease, mental illness, taboo, fetish come from. So I'll include many of these aspects, and I hope that you include questions in our group and we can really have a conversation about these topics. And throughout this week, you're welcome to go and delve as deep as you can and really unpack your own things. Ask for a session with me one-on-one if you need help with that. Otherwise, you can also just go directly at whatever the beast is, whatever that nugget of unconscious material that you've named is, and just make the strong intention to go there and deal with it. And we'll end with going through the phases of arranging yourself into a ritual space container. What are the key ingredients and how to actually access that? And today's daily, weekly practice this week is around entering and playing around in the archetypal, the transpersonal realm, where the shadow becomes more tangible and we're able to play with. So let's see some slides. I love slides. This week's theme indeed goes into a lot of the shadow work. I included the beautiful poem from Thunder, just the words that really to me spoke into what power the shadow has. I am control and the uncontrollable. I am the union and the dissolution. I am the abiding and I am the dissolution. I am the one below and they come up to me. I am the judgment and the acquittal. I am sinless and the root of sin derives from me. I am lust in outward appearance and interior self-control exists within me. Hear me in gentleness. Learn of me in roughness. I am she who cries out. And I am cast forth upon the face of the earth. So, what do we define as shadow? For me, there's a big difference between the dark, which encompasses everything, and the way we are talking about the dark body is really, for me, more of the sense of immersing into all of experience. So the dark actually encompasses the shadow, but it is not limited to. And the shadow is often what we are shame or outcast for. The shadow is something we don't want to look at. It is the fear, and nobody wants to be in fear. However, our society is constructed as so that fear exists, and fear is coming at us from media, from even the movies, the stories. Maybe you remember as a child when you first experienced a fear coming through. It was exciting. It is exhilarating. I, for one, when discovering horror films or, scary scenes and how they penetrated my subconscious, I had nightmares of Jaws, like the shark coming through my bedroom window in the 5th floor. These titanic images awaken something in us. And that's something, besides relating to survival fear and our animal body getting activated with, oh my God, I'm in danger and I have to run away from it. Sometimes it also causes us to completely shut down and go into a state of freeze. So let's talk a little bit about what the difference is between fight and flight and freeze. Whatever we are afraid of, whatever it is that controls us in the level of mind, we usually tend to avoid really going there. The instant reaction is to turn the other way, run away, which is the sympathetic nervous system's job. Our heart rate increases. We may start to shake. There's a visceral panic that comes through in a situation that could be escalating into a conflict or a danger. And if the parasympathetic doesn't switch on and freeze happens, we go into the state of almost not being able to react, to respond. The heart actually slows down, the breathing shallows. People go into a state of shock. And that is meant for the body to reserve, like keep all its resources on a slow drip so that we can live through, for example, a painful cut or a situation we're really just having to play dead. But that often happens in overwhelm and shutdown in our human, very complex psychological landscapes, even at work, even in states of, deep conflict or confrontation around a primal fear that we already have in the psychological realm. So the one question is whether the body reacts first or the mind creates the fear and we react to that. Pay close attention to where that point of turn is, and where we tend to dissociate from having a holistic experience of feeling our bodies and really focusing on that one thing, whether it's attention projected out into kind of hypervigilance of everything that's happening around us. The senses of hearing and sight might be really overactive, or whether it's that shutdown and everything just kind of goes away and maybe the soul or the consciousness kind of goes into observer mode from the outside, and everything may slow down or speed up and we don't really fully have control over our own bodies. The ways of getting through this, obviously we have these experiences even just driving a car around traffic, we are in a constant state of hypervigilance. And when we do that consecutively for days, for weeks, for years, the anxiety, the stress accumulates in the body, and we need releases of that. Otherwise, we go into these states of mental disorder or numbness and dissociation from life and experiencing life, because life is just too dangerous, too intense going at us. So the most part I see in the world, scared animals not living fully, not being able to express that which is blocking them. So let's go into the expressions of these fear states, how to get through that. That's part of our practices this week, especially moving through anger, which is part of the fight and flight. But I'm trying to include both that and then also that state of freeze where we're not fully in the body. And you can use the same movement practice to release from the freeze state. And I've included fuck as one of the reflexes because what may also happen in a state of panic is that we think we're aroused in a sexual sense. The arousal hormone kicks in, and we actually want to copulate. It's almost like this animal system of, okay, I'm in lethal danger. I need to continue, or like I need to mate before I die. Or it's a masculine reflex of I need to penetrate as a form of attack. Or in the feminine system, I think it often relates to kind of the freeze and then the fuck as a way of getting out of it. So especially in situations where we're being close to rape, I feel like the body might shut down and we're unable to voice stop or slow or what's happening to come back into the body. And instead, the urge is to have someone override with their power so that the penetration is actually what brings us back to the body, but in a way that is not in our control. So yeah, just take a moment, have a deep breath with sound out. And I'll just quickly describe these ways of moving through instead of getting stuck in the fear. Shaking is amazing. Just releasing muscular tension. Just, again, going through the physical body, mobilizing our joints, our limbs, being able to move them, trying to restore movement back into the body. If you're working with someone else, that's a point where you might do gentle rocking to bring them back in. Not overly touching, not overly penetrating or overriding, but just gently bringing them back into their own body. If shaking doesn't work, sounding comes really important. And one of the keys to this area is that we take deeper out breaths than in breaths. We might go into a state of hyperventilation in like real state of panic and panic attack. So sounding out really long and really like bowely relaxes the vagus nerve, which is what we're looking to do. There's more information about the vagus nerve in the below and in our extra resources. So that includes breath work and sounding. And if nothing else, I would make a person stomp on their feet so that they really connect back to the earth, feeling their bone structure, getting power back into the body. This first kind of base level security is of stomping your own body toward the ground, anchoring yourself into also a beat that isn't too quick. It might be quick at first and then slow down. But the point is, any rhythm, any beat controls our heart heartbeat, our heart rate. So once we get someone to just stomp on the ground slowly but steadily, it usually means they're gaining back power into their body. And the extra key in this is that it was like a Maori war stomp. We are connecting and stating our boundary that this is my ground. I'm standing here, my earth, my body, my territory. So especially in states where you feel threatened in terms of your boundary, whether it's on the dance floor at your own house, going through a shamanic process, this stomp connects us back to the rhythm, ideally of the earth itself, making us feel connected to a larger whole. And these deeper breaths that I mentioned, this vagus nerve that I mentioned, you may watch that document, like little explanation of where it runs through, but it basically runs from the brain, communicating to the brain about our whole system, running through facial muscles, the throat, having connections to the thyroid, having connections to the heart, having connections to our digestive system and bowels, and having connections to our reproductive system. So the vagus nerves has a huge impact on that fight, flight, freeze, and fuck systems. And something usually prevents it from fully getting information in or out from the brain. And these different firings happen where it's in a constant state of tension. And you may even feel it in your neck, in your heart, in your body, in your bowels, and tension. That's why when we want to release and relax the vagus nerve, we take deep breaths out. Singing is one of the beautiful ways of just doing that. And in a lot of circles, we do omming. The sounds of A, U, and M tend to relax all of that, which is the key point, the key axis between the brain and the whole nervous system. So taking a deep breath. And something magical about not just the syllable, but the reaction in the body of calming you down. And then once we've calmed down and we're able to look at where the pain is, we can look at the pain, whether it is physical, which is where we go into, okay, I need to relax and release and go into that point in the body and bring breath into it, bring release into it, whether it's emotional pain, whereas we open the heart center and we look at what's there, and we might need support and help in going through emotional struggle, whatever the feeling that we can't fully go into. Music will help as a watery element of dealing with grief, dealing with anger, moving the body in that emotional state. Again, our practice goes into this. A phantom pain is almost that it's dissociated from the body. There might be a strange feeling of pain in the energetic or the astral kind of archetypal body, which is where we need the imagination to go into it and feel into whether it's your pain or whether you're actually sensing someone else's pain in the room, in the environment. Babies have this ability. So we have an instinctual ability to feel pain of other people. And we've taken a lot of energy to shut that pain out. But what if we are able to breathe that pain in a Buddhist way We breathe the pain in and we sound out with compassion. So our bodies are able to transmute pain in the outside world. In the same way as a mass of people overreacting together creates an angry mob, you being able to convert the situation, and I used to use this a lot when I was hitchhiking in a car. I'd be sitting with some stranger and they might be in an agitated state. My job to coming into any situation was to take deep breaths and be the catalyst of relaxation and calming the situation down instead of hyping the situation up. So in a many and aggressive or hypervigilant kind of situations, I am in charge of bringing another person down and calming them down. This is something that I've naturally been doing probably since I was very young, but it has dawned on me that this is actually part of my practice in the world to calm other people's nervous systems down around me just by mine being slow, my tone of voice being calm, everything about me going into more toward the relaxed nervous system and giving permission for others to be there as well. So that is something that you may explore just as a physiological explanation, seeing where you are through the day, taking deep breaths and taking ohms in different states. And then when we go into those psychological pains where we actually go into, okay, that's a story that I have about myself, about my life, it's a repeating pattern. One of the places to interact with that is looking at the first instance of where that belief might come from, that I'm alone or nobody loves me, no one's coming, I can't trust anyone. The deepest work that I found is Stanislav Grof's work around this and the perinatal matrices of kind of phases of birth and the fetal phase of just being in the womb. So we speak into, I'll show you briefly where we're at. I made this beautiful drawing once upon a time about these matrices. The first place where we might experience the world as a hostile place is the intrauterine existence. You don't have a conscious memory of this, but somewhere in the being, in the nervous system, in the cellular sense, there might be a feeling that it's not safe. The world is a hostile place. The world is a toxic place. And this might be connected to experiences in the womb of feeling toxicity or feeling the panic of the mother, being in loud environments or exposed to, again, stress from the mother. And ideally, when we go through and we want to reprogram this, we may go into the womb-like state and experience a state of oneness with all. Ideally, our ego actually dissolves when we go into that deepest state. There may be past life flashbacks or other kind of karmic influences that come in as parts of the soul's incarnational journey, which are beautiful, but actually we're looking for a state of this oceanic non-duality. This is the ideal state that we come into the world with as a baby. And it exists somewhere in us. We've had those experiences, even if the womb would have been hostile. There's a lot of states most of the time when the baby is actually in perfect harmony with the cosmos. And this is where it gets interesting, because the birth is actually the death of that universe. The birth is the first chaotic disturbance to the whole of what we know exists. thus far. So our first death is experienced at birth. And Gruff's matrices go into these 3 phases after that intrauterine that cause us to have severe states of trauma, or the first states of negative emotionality. The second one is expulsion from paradise, the loss of the known universe, the literal state of no exit. There is a physical discomfort and emergency. The waters leave, and panic, claustrophobia, this state of that freeze may come in because there is nowhere to go. The cervix hasn't opened yet to allow the birth canal to be accessible. And this experience relived in therapeutic settings, especially in Gruff's work. There's often scenes of monsters, underworld, apocalypse, torture, terror, suffering, war, epidemics, and hopelessness. In a way, we're in this state of lockdown. We're really confined into our really close existence. And the feelings that may come over in the collective right now is the feeling of stuckness. And like struggle is futile, we can't go anywhere. Tension all over, pressure on the head, heaviness of the chest. There might be a lot of, just like fear scenarios showing up. It's a state of hormonal disturbance, increasingly dramatic contractions were happening with the mother. So there's a sense of just being squeezed, interruptions in the oxygen flow, can't breathe properly, sometimes entanglement with the umbilical cord. Use of anesthesia might come in where we literally go numb and can't move. So observe these states if you're going on a journey into your own fears, into your own states of trauma that may exist from a precognitive space just in the body. The way out of this is just the conscious acceptance of the original feelings of the fetus. Perhaps it is called just based on writing a poem, really kind of doing that extreme tightening and tensing as a way of, okay, I'm really feeling the contraction and I'm really going through that phase and holding it and creating the opening for myself to go through. The only thing that really gets us out of this really infantile state of no exit is that we find the exit, we push through the exit. The third matrix is fight for survival. We finally have the ability to move, and pain, like aggression, this like rage comes through, the baby's rage to like rush through into the world, into anywhere, the light in the end of the tunnel. However, this is where the presence of blood and mucus, urine, feces, like things may come in as like sensory overload. Groff described the states of reliving this as themes of aggressive sadomasochistic tendencies. Volcanic ecstasy might be there, depending on how the mother's body is responding. Or there's images of demonic scatological experiences of I'm in hell and I'm burned, and these incredible feelings, emotional overwhelm might rush through as we explode into the other end, into the other world. So that is kind of the state that we're looking for when we speak about going through a cathartic process, going through a state where we have to birth ourselves through. And then once we birth ourselves through, we enter this state of death and rebirth. major separation from everything as we knew it. Individuation begins. We might feel alone in a hostile place again, depending on what your experience of birth was like. There's also a sense of an ego death or an identity death, of being that symbiotic oneness with the universe and being born into this blob that doesn't really know how to move itself yet. So we might integrate and release the trauma from the birth, especially when we're pressed against the mother, we come home into the heartbeat that we know, experiencing ideally contact with a higher power. We're welcomed into the universe. But sometimes and often babies might be born prematurely, put into chambers. Just go back and revisit early birth traumas that you might have had, presence of metal objects, vaccines at birth, or the cutting of the umbilical cord. In a lot of ancient shamanic cultures, that in itself is the disconnection from the placenta, the universe, the feeding force. So there's different ways to navigate this, but I just wanted to give you this whole map. And like, I love using this as an example of the origin of most of our trauma. If we go deep enough and dig through, there are beliefs that I have based on being born late, it was quite a long period of me just hanging out in the birth phase before my mother had a cesarean. So I never got to experience some of these parts of being born. Someone took me out. So there's a passivity into it. There's probably the presence of epidurals and, you know, the trying of pushing and yet nothing happening. So things being done to me, and my process of psychologically accepting that things are just happening and I have no choice over it but to stay put and wait for something to happen. So one of my biggest triggers in life is waiting for something to happen, waiting for someone to come. And I really need to work on that pushing through, fighting for survival, getting out of the house and going for it. To work effectively with these states would require a supportive environment, techniques to allow you to live and relive and work through not just the related kind of adult traumas, but the underlying primary memories. Breath work is often used in this case. Gruff used LSD therapy, and that's where most of his like beautiful imagery comes from. I've included the book chapter that describes all these matrices and experiences that may be had connected to that. So look into where you might have an obsession toward, an interest toward, and digging deeper into putting yourself in that archetypal scenario as a way of just exploring, surrendering, and living through a memory that may not be from this lifetime, that is really coming from the collective ocean of impressions. And usually these things activate just in little tiny moments in our lives, events that bring out emotional trigger and may launch depression, disorder, something in our lives because we don't really know how to navigate through. So ideally, if you are to work with people, especially working with sexuality and the body, just the nervous system pieces coming in, there might be experiences connected to the fetal trauma and needing to just be held and rocked as one of them, needing to encourage someone to be in a crunch and then push themselves open. using the emotional release as a way of empowering someone to move through that. And then the rebirth, the integration, the welcoming into the world is really important as a way of you holding space for someone else to go through their process. So not coming in and rescuing and helping someone out, but even using, and we're going into this next, using different tools, using kink as a way of actually allowing the reliving of the process to happen. Interested? We'll go back into my little presentation. So birth trauma is an experience of going through the dark night of the soul. It usually activates at some point in our lives where we feel like we're dying. We're going through an ego death. We're going through death of ourselves as we know it. But the death is also a birth, and we don't have to go through physical death. I would love us to look at death as a birth into the next realm. And that will help us to go through the pain instead of avoiding those places in our lives. So how do we rebirth ourselves is the next theme. And how do we reconnect the soul and the body into that experience so that we experience oneness again between the whole universe, between me and myself and my body, that we're not separate. I don't have to abandon my cellular self. The consciousness coming back and also reawakening the connection to the universe as an erotic place, as a pleasurable place where we can explore our senses. So start by noticing patterns in your life and those things that play around. We're going into realms where the shadows manifest in the world through fetishes, through taboos, something that carries charge for us. If it's something that you'd never do and there's a literal kind of fear reaction that comes through, there's probably something in there to look at. So look for the places that you're avoiding. Suggestions around, and I'm going to use BDSM as one of those pathways, the existential edges of our lives. So the questions are, how do we take power back in a situation that triggers our primal fear or our primal trauma? The empowerment that comes when we do take charge of our lives is huge. It's like restoring back a limb, our long lost part of myself. So this is the intent that we go in to ritual space with. Exploring conscious surrender means that I am giving permission to someone to hold me, to guide me, to take charge of the situation. And if you're struggling with trust and surrender, it is really beautiful to work with a master or someone who is professionally capable of holding that space for you. A word from the kink world is that we don't really know who's therapeutically trained and who isn't. So if you want to explore this as a pathway of recovering your trauma, working through it, gaining back your power through the use of kink, please check your references of someone who might be able to hold space for that. What have they trained in? Do they have the right tools? Do they have recommendations? I only know a few female practitioners who have such a level of integration to hold someone in their struggle. But ideally, we're all working to be able to do that. So the question, first of all, is who is already your master? We all have a master that we follow rules of, whether it's money or system, the police, the state, the government, our father might still have a head and voice in our heads. We've given our power away, often to the strong masculine archetype. And we might hate them for it. We might have a slave master relationship to them, not consensually. And in those cases, we want to take the power back, first of all, by acknowledging where we have gone astray, and then by switching roles and seeing how even being in a state of surrender is powerful. We are taking the attention of someone, and our ability to actually go through the feeling and transmute that is someone giving us the experience and the opportunity to reprogram, relive through the belief systems, the traumas that don't anymore serve us. So kink can be done in the dirty way and in the healing way. And the healing way often involves slowing down and you coming up with the scene that you want to explore. Maybe there is a fear into it. Maybe there is a charge of like desire and fantasy related to that. Both of those avenues are a place of going in. And what would happen in a beautiful ritual space of exploring this are these elements of constructing a scenario together before we enter into it. Intention, making a decision to change something, to look at something, and to go there, to really speak about that before we begin. Creating a womb-like container is part of the role of whoever is holding space, but also you, if you are the one stepping into it, and you might play both parts for yourself this week. So creating a womb-like container includes setting up a time frame of how long you are there, not getting lost in it. Space as a private, separate ritual space. Ideally, you can be in a different place in your house that you don't normally sleep in or spend time in, so that it is a special kind of temple creation on around you. Selecting a soundtrack that feels fit for you. I'll give some music lists, kind of albums that you may be able to just play in the background, depending how dark or melodic you want to go. And lighting also matters, and the time of day you do this matters. So select all of your kind of pointers of how to make the space more womb-like, that is held from the outside elements. Lock your doors, close your phones, just go into, okay, I'm doing this as a ritual. And then pick a shaman who is the conductor, who is the catalyst of the transformation. In ecstatic dances, there's usually a DJ who's guiding the ceremony to go forward, and we willingly go with the music to create this pumping effect of raising our state into a state of ecstasy. We might have a facilitator, we might have someone holding space, a dom, a therapist, anyone who is kind of in charge of telling us what to do when, and also asking us questions to bring us back to the body. Or we may use a substance. Psychedelic substances have been used from the dawning of humankind. We may use breath work as the catalyst. And you may be your own shaman, in which case we kind of use the same aspects that we've done in the 6 bodies practice of amping our bodies to such a state of entering the archetypal body. So we're looking for that realm of the transpersonal, the in-between state. I promise to speak more about that. So in my experience, a liminal state is a state in between. A state in between waking and dreaming, a state between spirit and matter, a state between the present moment and the journey through time. It might be past, it might be future, wherever we're going. You know when you're in it, because kind of time doesn't exist and we are really fully in the experience. I can lose a bit of my ego and the mind steps away, and the ability to surrender to the process becomes evident. If you have trouble doing that, then recruiting someone to hold space for you is really potent. An example of a scenario that I see this happening is getting tied up, using rope as the element of kind of being the shaman. You might need someone to do this, but being constricted by someone else and not being able to move is a strong trigger of a liminal state. You might not even notice, but just having that experience of being confined and hanging or swinging or being covered in a blanket or whatever it is, that state when we're in it is the state where we let go and consciously surrender and journey. And this is where transformation happens. This is where the crescendo of the music comes in, or a shamanic drumming state comes in. We have a chance to touch our subconscious mind, our belief systems, and kind of hypnotize ourselves again. This is the storytelling. We might place some hints around the place for ourselves. What do we want to be told when we're in this state? If you're doing this by yourself, you might include notes that you want to reprogram yourself with. So there might be some little paper notes that say affirmations. There might be a poem or a song that you've already had in your head that you want to voice in this time. So the liminal state is something that is hardest for us to be in it ourselves, but we often gain mastery of that state, and shamans have a mastery of that state. Real true shamans are comfortable in these realms of archetypes, psychedelia, trance-like experience. And actually, a true shaman is able to switch from the psychedelia to present-day consciousness. So they can be sober and intoxicated at the same time. And they will not take advantage of the situation. They are there just as a guide, as a facilitator, as a being who knows the realms and can guide you through it. This beautiful example of ayahuasqueros who sing Icaros. They sing for your soul as you journey. I'll include one playlist with Icaros if you want to explore that realm. It's been really beautiful to do breath work and have a song come through that is about the Amazon, about the jungle, about the plant nature of life, and how that's triggered a really old memory of being connected to the earth as an animal body. Those are some of the examples. Equally important is the process of coming home, closing the journey, integration, understanding, a deeper sense of meaning coming through. So take time to kind of have a crescendo, and then as you're coming out, have a blanket, have a journaling, go outside, reacquaint yourself with life, have an affirmation of, oh, this experience has been so beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm closing the ceremony. I'm bringing all of my parts back to myself. And I release any remaining attachment to an outcome. So these are the phases that I've spoken into. You should be free to go and explore dragons throughout this week, but in particular before leading up to our next group call. I would like you to have a sense of what it is to go there. And you having a sense of what it is to go there before you take someone else there. Have a call with me if you are working with someone else and want to do this with them or for them, because there are more kind of steps to make sure of that, and some things might come out. And my version is to opt for less interference rather than more interference. So if you feel like a person is going into a state of a panic attack, those forms of just shaking, soothing with sound, allowing the sounds to come, and even just playing music that has a slower beat to allow someone to calm down, asking first if they want touch. This is where transformation happens. This is really the work that integrates us back into life. So these tools are shamanic, they're therapeutic, they are transformational, and there is a risk in using them. So what I really like to trust is that your intention is pure, of taking yourself there, of taking someone else there, which is why we're doing this work anchored into the energy of the Dakini, the feminine compassion, the Buddha nature of love on the planet. We need to be anchored in love ourselves before we can hold space for another. So any time before you are welcoming a client in, or before you even do this with yourself, check if you can be in a space of love to hold that person through this. Everything else happens within us anyway. We will have a strong process or a weak process depending on how much capacity we have at this moment. So pay attention. I hope that you've got some inspiration for creating scenarios, and we can talk more on the group about what those scenarios might look like. Thank you for watching.